back to my channel. My name is Taylor. For today's video, I'm actually going to be doing my review of Stephen King's short story collection, If It Bleeds. I really wanted to do like a traditional vlog. I normally, with Stephen King's new releases, do a reading vlog and then a spoiler review at the end of the vlog, and that just didn't really work out with this collection. I definitely spaced these short stories out a little bit longer. I was thinking I could just kind of push through it and read through this whole entire thing like a regular novel, but I ended up taking about 2 weeks and spacing it out, like reading one short story, and then I read a whole bunch of other things and then went back to this book. So it didn't make for a very cohesive vlog, so I just decided to not vlog it and just kind of give my overall review of this book just all at once. So that's what this video is going to be. I have talked before on my channel about my preference for Stephen King works. I tend to love really big chunky books, and I'm just not a big short story person in general, and Stephen King isn't an exception to that. So while I was really looking forward to this, it wasn't like on the top of my new release radar just because I prioritize longer novels over short stories. That's just preference though. To me, I was really excited to hear that this was only 4 short stories because that would mean that they were a whole lot longer in length, which I feel for me made it a really enjoyable reading experience just because you did get some more page time, especially the titular If It Bleeds could have been, I felt like, published on its own. I am glad it was put in a short story collection because I don't think it needed to be published on its own, but it is like a novella length by itself. So there are 4 short stories in here. The first one is Mr. Harrigan's Phone, the second one is The Life of Chuck, the third one is If It Bleeds, and the fourth one is Rat. Now personally, my favorite one was Rat. I do know that's a little bit of an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people are going into this looking for If It Bleeds because that is the one that follows Holly Gibney, and she has been a recurring character in a whole lot of other King work. So I would highly recommend, if you want to pick this up without any spoilers, to read the Mr. Mercedes trilogy and then The Outsider before reading this one. However, I've only read Mr. Mercedes. I haven't finished the rest of the trilogy just because it really wasn't my favorite book. I did read The Outsider and love The Outsider though. So if you've only read The Outsider, you will be good because really it just kind of spoils what was already spoiled in The Outsider, and then it just kind of wraps up the end of The Outsider for you. So keep that in mind if you are going into this not having read those books. You will get spoiled. Now this is not my favorite King short story collection that I have read, but I did think it was a really good piece of work, and I would say every single other short story in this collection other than If It Bleeds definitely reads like older King short stories. So if you are interested in that old feel, especially Rat, I think really calls back to some older King tropes, which I really loved. So if you are looking for that, those are really good. If It Bleeds does follow the same format in Mr. Mercedes or The Outsider, and it is more of a detective story, and it feels like a detective story with some supernatural elements thrown in there. So if you weren't really a fan of those, you probably wouldn't like If It Bleeds, and I would actually recommend you check this out from the library if you have any hesitations on that before purchasing a copy, just because the majority of this book is If It Bleeds. So I don't think you'll get your money's worth if you aren't interested in that style of King writing, because the other 3 are very short compared to that story. But I will say, out of the 4 short stories that are in here, my favorite one was Rat. I just felt like that one was a really wonderfully done. It has some things that I feel like have been done in other King short stories and novels before in terms of tropes, and you're following a writer in a secluded area. So I wouldn't say it's the most unique of the stories, but I just felt like it was my favorite because it really felt like a King short story. And for me also, I'm writing, so I feel like if you've ever had any sort of writing ambitions or writing experience, or even just artistic in any way, like if you like to paint or draw or produce any sort of content, I feel like you will really resonate with the main character in Rat, how it is a struggle sometimes to find that muse and how it comes in spurts to you, and also the struggle with trying to monetize something that you enjoy and then having that extra pressure of monetizing something that you enjoy. So I really enjoyed that one. As for the other ones, Mr. Harrigan's Phone and The Life of Chuck, I felt like were very, very similar, especially if you read them back to back. I felt like there were a lot of similarities between the main character. There's a supernatural plot device, there's there's a mentor character, and there's also like a close relationship with a female teacher, like also a mentor as well. So I think the short story collection benefits a lot from having split up the works and not just reading it all in one go, because those were the two that I read the closest together, and I definitely felt like I could see the similarities more. Out of the two of those, I probably would say I liked Mr. Harrington's Phone a little bit more, just based on the fact that it felt like a short story. The Life of Chuck felt very fractured to me, just because I feel like Mr. Harrington's Phone was a complete short story. Everything wrapped up how it was supposed to. You understood the lesson at the end. It felt very much like a Twilight Zone episode. The Life of Chuck, I would say, was more innovative and better writing and more inventive, but there are two separate parts of the story, the first and the second part, and they don't feel like they mesh together at all for me, which is unfortunate because I feel like that one had a lot more opportunity to be a really wonderful story for me, and there were a lot of risks taken that just didn't really work for me, and I wish that it just felt like two different short stories at times. So that was a little bit of a letdown, but I think that one is the most sentimental, and I think that one is the least horrifying, but the one that'll hit your heartstrings the most. Now, in terms of actually If It Bleeds, I was actually really excited when I found out that one of the short stories was going to feature Holly Gibney, just because I read The Outsider actually before I read Mr. Mercedes, because I didn't realize that you probably should read Mr. Mercedes first, and I really loved her in The Outsider. She was one of my favorite characters in The Outsider. And then when I went to read Mr. Mercedes, I have a lot of problems with that book, and I feel okay saying that because Stephen King's one of my favorite writers still, and he has over 60 books, so, you know, they're not all going to resonate with you the same way. I had a lot of issues with Mr. Mercedes and issues with Holly, and she definitely didn't seem like the same character she was in The Outsider. Obviously, I'm sure that in the rest of that trilogy, she gets a lot more character development. So I would say if you've only read Mr. Mercedes and you're therefore nervous about The Outsider, or If It Bleeds, if you don't mind being spoiled for a little bit of The Outsider, then you pick up If It Bleeds and try it out, because I think Holly herself is a fascinating character. I feel like it just keeps getting better as time goes on. So I really enjoyed it. I think the hardest part for me of If It Bleeds is that it is very similar to The Outsider, done on purpose. It almost feels like this could have been a sequel to The Outsider, but he decided to make it a short story instead, which I think was good because it was very similar in terms of basic plot structure. So even though this is like novella length, it's not novel length. So everything wraps up very fast. There's a lot of convenient things when they're doing this detective work that really spring them from one place to another. Obviously, you're constrained in a novella. It just feels, you know, everything is very convenient, and there's not really a sense of urgency or a sense of fear. The bad guy, if you will, in this he had the potential to be very terrifying, but because there's so little space, and by the time you're coming to the end of the conflict and you realized how much little time was left in the novella, you kind of knew how it was going to end, and there just wasn't like a lot of drama back and forth between that. So I did really enjoy it. I thought it was good writing. I loved seeing Holly again. Like I said, it did kind of feel like it maybe was something that he was considering undoing as a sequel to The Outsider potentially, and then just couldn't find enough like novel space for it, so he shortened it and made it a novella, but it was still really entertaining too, and it does have some like pulling your heartstrings moments in there as well. So overall, would I recommend this book? I think I would, with a caveat. For most people who are looking to get into Stephen King's writing, I normally recommend either like Carrie or a collection of his short stories to really get a feel for his work. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as your first Stephen King book. Just like I said, If It Bleeds takes up most of the page time in here, and you really need to be versed in his other work to really enjoy that one. So maybe skip this if this is going to be your first Stephen King book. I don't think it is a good first Stephen King book. If you are a big fan of King, I don't think this is going to let you down. I think a lot of the criticisms of his work and the types of stories he's been doing are confined to If It Bleeds. So if you don't like that type of writing he's been doing lately, he's been doing more of like thriller writing and not as much horror writing, you're gonna find a lot in here. Like a lot of the short stories really felt like Old Time King, which I really enjoyed. I know it's really hard to get books right now, so I will say Scribd does have this. If you do have a membership to Scribd, I think you can get like a free trial run during this time to try it out. The audiobook is pretty good. 4 different narrators read each of the different stories. If you are not a collector like me, I mean, I am getting pretty much every single book that this man comes out with. I would say this is probably one that you could rent from the library. I will want to reread this eventually. I probably won't feel the need to unless I do, like, if I reread The Outsider or something like that. I'll probably want to reread If It Bleeds just to get more in the world and to get more of Holly. So while it hasn't been like my favorite thing that he has come out with in recent years, I just think it's just because I'm not like a short story person. So I did really enjoy it for what it was. It was a solid short story collection. It was a lot of fun to read. It definitely was nice during this very hard time right now to get a new release from one of my favorite authors and to really have some of the writing in here feel so comforting and feel like a King short story. Was really nice to read. So that is going to be the end of this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a like, subscribe for more content from me. I will catch y'all in the next video. Bye!